Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the July 19th, 2022 Enforcement and Compounding Committee meeting. My name is Maria Serpa, and I'm chairperson of this committee. Before we convene, I'd like to remind everyone present that the board is a consumer protection agency charged with the administering and enforcing of pharmacy law. Where protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, protection of the public shall be paramount. This meeting today is being conducted consistent with the provisions of Government Code Section 11133. Participants watching the webcast will only be able to observe the meeting. Anyone interested in participating in the meeting must join via WebEx. Information and instructions are posted on our website. As I facilitate this meeting, I will announce when we are accepting public comment. I had advised the moderator that we were allotting 3 minutes to each individual providing comments. This approach is necessary to facilitate this meeting and to assure the committee has the opportunity to complete its necessary business. I would now like to ask staff moderating the meeting to provide general instructions to the members of the public participating via WebEx. Moderator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we get started, I would like to remind committee members and senior staff who are not speaking to mute their microphone. If I detect background noise during the meeting as a result of unmuted microphones, I will interject with a brief friendly reminder or simply mute the microphones. To facilitate public comment, we will be utilizing the WebEx question and answer feature, also referred to as the Q&A panel. When the committee chair reaches a point in the agenda at which public comment is appropriate, public comment will be requested. At the committee's direction, I will turn on and announce the opening of the Q&A feature. It is not necessary to identify yourself in order to make public comment. Please note that the Q&A feature is being used only as a means for members of the public to represent that they would like to make a verbal comment. Once given permission to unmute, the member of the public may unmute themselves and verbally state their comment. The Q&A feature is not to be used for typing out questions or for committee members to communicate with one another. If any attendees utilize a profane name, they will not be called upon to prevent members of the public from being subjected to profane language. While you are free to express criticism or negative views, for the sake of members of the public participating on the call, please do not use profane language when making public comments to the committee. And with that, I return the floor back to you, Committee Chair.
Thank you. Before we begin today, I would like to welcome our newest board member, Dr. Renee Amandaris Barker. Welcome, Dr. Barker. Good to see you.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the nice welcome, and I'm honored to be here.
Great. Let's now take a roll call to establish a quorum. Members, as I call your name, please remember to open your line before speaking. Dig Patel.
Licensee member present.
Renee Barker.
Licensee member present.
Indira Cameron Banks.
Public member present.
Sung Oh.
A licensee member present.
Ricardo Sanchez. My understanding is Ricardo will not be joining us today. A quorum has been established. Members, we have a full agenda for our meeting today, and I appreciate all your time and commitment to the board and to California consumers. I ask everyone participating today to be respectful of the work before the committee and encourage participation by members of the public throughout the meeting at appropriate times. The committee respectfully requests that comments provided are done in a professional manner and consistent with how the board conducts its business. I'll now open the meeting to public comment for items not on the agenda. I'd like to remind members of the public that you are not required to identify yourself, but may do so. I would also like to remind everyone that the committee cannot take action on these items except to decide whether to place them on a future agenda. Members, following public comment for this agenda item, I will ask you for comment on what, if any, items should be placed on a future agenda. As a reminder, this agenda item is not intended to be for discussion today, but rather an opportunity for members of the committee and the public to request consideration of the item on a future agenda. Moderator, we're ready to ask for public comment from individuals.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. Just a reminder, you'll have a 3-minute time period to speak. I'll give you a 10-second warning. And we have Alan Kim wishing to make comments. So Alan, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. My name's Alan Kim. I'm a licensed nuclear pharmacist and operations director for Cardinal Health Nuclear and Precision Health Solutions Division. We operate 10 of the 24 nuclear pharmacies in the state of California. I'm on here today to request that the Enforcement Committee place an item on the agenda for the next meeting to discuss Cardinal Health's request for a waiver to the 1-to-1 pharmacist to technician ratio, or any other potential remedy for the meeting the intentions of the ratio, given the unique operations of nuclear pharmacies. I obviously realize we can't discuss any decisions, but if you have any preliminary questions, I can certainly answer those. Or if there's any additional information that the committee may need prior to the next meeting, written material, I can ensure that we provide that as well.
I know we're not supposed to discuss items, but before we move on, Anne, can you respond to the waiver process and maybe help to direct this person offline?
Yeah, if the committee's in agreement, I'd like to just ask Dr. Kim to please reach out to me following the meeting, and I'm happy to discuss the issue.
Thank you.
All right, this is a moderator. I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So just to be clear for the members, I don't want to make it sound like we have not listened to members of the public, but that item is going to be, it's a specific licensee question that should go to the office, and Anne will be assisting. So we don't need to discuss the specific incident on a future agenda. Members, do you have any questions? Okay, let's move on. Item number 3, approval of April 20th committee meeting minutes. Included in attachment 1 of the meeting materials is draft minutes of the committee's April 20th, 2022 meeting. For some reason, I don't have my changes on my agenda, on my script here, sorry. But we are suggesting a couple, I have worked with the office to make some non-substantive changes to the copy that you have in your packages, but there is one substantive change that I would like to request, and that is projected on the screen there. The red word has been changed from non-board to board licensed personnel. Members, do you have any comments or questions on the draft minutes and the proposed changes? As a part of your discussion, I would entertain a motion that would include this change.
Serpa, this is Song. I'm more than happy to offer a motion to approve as displayed on the screen.
And this is Jig. I'll second that.
Great.
So just to clarify, is the motion to approve the minutes as amended, as discussed, something along those lines? So it's not just approving the change on the screen, but the minutes in its totality with that change?
Sure, of course.
I agree as well.
Great, thank you. With a motion and second on the floor, I will now open the discussion for public comment on the draft minutes. Moderator, we're ready for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. Any member of the public that would like to comment may type comment in the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions, and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
With a motion and second and public comment received, I will now take a roll call vote. Jig Patel,
Yes.
Renee Barker,
Yes.
Indira Cameron Banks,
Yes.
Sung Oh,
Yes.
and I vote yes, motion passes. Thank you. Item number 4, discussion and consideration of possible recommendations to the board to approve draft changes to CCR 1715 related to self-assessment of an automated drug delivery system by the pharmacist in charge of an unlicensed AUDS. Give me just a moment. I'm going to reprint my my notes here. It looks like I have a different version in front of me, so if we could just pause for a moment. Apologize. Okay, we'll just continue with what I have here. I apologize for the delay there.
Do you want to take a 10-minute break? I want to make sure you have what you need.
Can we just take a 5-minute pause here? I appreciate that. I only have
Absolutely.
one other section that had a pretty significant change, and I want to make sure that I don't confuse the members of the public and yourselves. So thank you. Let's take a few minute break.
Of course. Let's take a, okay.
So 5 minutes, we'll come back at 9:17.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Sung. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience during this delay. Unfortunately, I had made some changes to what I was going to say today last night and printed the wrong version. So I apologize for the delay there, but we'll resume. Do we have, since we did take a break, I should take another roll call. I apologize again for doing 2 roll calls so quickly back to back here. Jig Patel,
Present.
Renee Barker,
Present.
Indira Cameron Banks. Indira, come back. Sung Oh,
Here.
Indira Cameron Banks. Did she? I don't see. Oh, there she is on the list there, but she may be away from her computer at this time.
You might be taking a longer stroll.
I understand that. We'll just pause for a moment. She may join us. Indira, are you back? We'll go ahead and get started. She probably will join us momentarily. Moderator, if you do see her come, can you let us know so that we can have the record note when she joins us?
This is the moderator. It looks like she did just unmute herself, so I think she is back.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I was having technical difficulties. Apologies.
No problem. Thank you. We're going to resume our agenda item number 4. Discussion and consideration and possible recommendation to the board to approve draft changes to CCR section 1715.1 related to self-assessment of an automated drug delivery system by a pharmacist in charge of unlicensed AUDS. The relevant sections of pharmacy law detailed in the meeting materials establish requirements for the use of automated unit dose drug delivery systems, referred to as AUDS, under specified conditions. Specifically and related to this agenda item are those AUDS that are exempt from licensure by the board, but otherwise require to comply with all other requirements of an automated drug delivery system. One such requirement is the completion of a self-assessment form for the ADDS. Although the relevant regulation currently provides that a self-assessment form must be completed annually, subsequently enacted statutory changes modified the frequency for completion of a self-assessment to every odd year, which is consistent with the required frequency to complete self-assessment forms for other licensees. So just as a reminder, the board has already considered the change to every odd year and voted to update this regulatory section to be consistent with the statute. So that part is already done, okay? Today, we are looking at something a little bit new and different. We have the opportunity to consider the policy goal of the self-assessment required specifically related to unlicensed AUDSs used in hospitals, and determine if the board should provide clarification on the requirement on when a hospital using this device with the same policies and procedures on the same computer platform, if a completion of a single one self-assessment form would be more appropriate. Such devices operate in the same manner and under the same conditions just outlined, and would yield the same results related to the compliance with the provisions of the law. Whether one self-assessment form is completed or several self-assessment forms are completed, they would be exactly the same. The policy question for us, I believe, boils down to, is there a value add for the PIC to be required to complete a self-assessment for each AUDS, or if a single form would be sufficient? Members, I have a background in hospital pharmacy, and I know that a very large hospital can use well over 100 AUDSs in a single building. Because the manufacturer is the same, the policies and procedures are the same, as is the staff, coupled with the fact that the programming managing how the device will operate is on a single platform, I believe the completion of one single self-assessment form is appropriate. There is no need for the PIC to complete more than 100 forms for the same information. Members, Attachment 2 includes draft language to further amend CCR 1715.1 that could be used to clarify the board's expectations, specifically related to self-assessment requirement for unlicensed AUDSs used in a hospital. As I previously mentioned, the board has previously taken action to amend this section, which is currently pending. So when you review the language today, the additional changes are reflected by a double underline and a double strike through. That's the part that we're considering today. In order to ensure we have a common understanding of the potential changes, I would like to quickly review the specific language related to our discussion today. And you can see that on the screen. Okay, so in this section, this is to simplify language. So there were some edits done to simplify the language, and that's in 1715.1B2. The next one is 1715.1C5 and C6. This updates language to be gender neutral. I'll give you a minute to look at that. And we're doing this with all of our regulations, is working on trying to make them gender neutral. And then 1715.1F is a new language that we are proposing that would clarify the board's expectation to completing the self-assessment form. Again, this is limited to unlicensed AUDSs used in a hospital. You will note that the specific conditions include, to qualify this modified self-assessment requirement, that the mechanical devices used to store, dispense, or distribute dangerous drugs must be from the same vendor and controlled by the same software in a single system that operates under the same policies and procedures. Members, before we both open up to discussion, I would like to recommend a correction or replacement. You see the term vendor referred to in the proposed language on the screen. I suggest that we change that word to manufacturer, which is a term that may be more appropriate. So members, I appreciate to hear your comments on the policy as well as to this change that I have just suggested, to see what your thoughts are. And if you believe that the change is appropriate, I would also entertain a motion moving forward, including the motion to change vendor to manufacturer. Members?
Maria, I have my hand raised, but I think I'm just gonna
Oh, please do
if
speak
that's-
up. I can't see
Yeah.
all of your hands.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So just confirming with Anne, if I can, about so with our BPC 4427.2, that language will allow us to add this additional layer that would allow kind of an exemption or kind of a additional, I guess, a leeway for hospitals to not have to do same self-assessment, because 4427.2 says unlicensed, but everything else shall be the same. So I just want to make sure that's clear for Anne and Eileen, and that this is not going to be a problem for us to develop this language. And secondly, since 1715.1 is already under review, not sure where we are. I should probably know, but I can't keep up with all the regulations in the process. So are we just going to pull it back and then just going to restart again? So we're going to do this today and then pull for the whole board when we have a meeting, and then we'll just go from there. Is that my understanding? Just want to confirm for the process wise.
Yeah, hi, this is Anne. If it's okay for me to jump in and just kind of respond to a couple of those things. So yes, we have confirmed that the board does have authority to do this, and we're super grateful for the partnership with DCA Council and our Reg Council in developing the language that you have before you today. So we have confirmed that. The statute provides the general authority, and sometimes the board will use regulations to further clarify what that authority looks like. So that's high level kind of discussion on that, but yes, we believe it's legally appropriate. With respect to the process, so the current proposed regulation change to 1715.1 is undergoing review by the Department of Consumer Affairs. So at the staff level, it has not been, we have not done any kind of public notice. It's still in the pre-review phase. So I think the recommendation from staff would be that if the committee and the board both believe that it is appropriate, we will modify the current regulation undergoing review and incorporate these additional changes as well. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I am happy to make a motion. I think that this is helpful. But before I go on, I'm going to let other people speak. So I will just never mind emotion, and I'll let Renee speak. I see her hand raised. So
Sung, did you say that you're going to wait on your motion, or you have made a motion?
Oh, I can make a motion, but Renee wanted to say something, so I'm gonna wait. I'll let her speak.
Okay, so there's no motion on the
Renee,
table.
by the way.
I just wanted to clarify for the minute. So there's no motion yet, but we're still having discussion. So Renee, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up, Maria, just to say that I would also be in agreement that the word vendor would be better changed to manufacturer. And, as those types of equipment are discussed, it's discussed in terms of manufacturers typically.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to make a motion on this as displayed to reflect Chair Serpa's changes to manufacturer on that sentence, and I think that should cover it. And stop me if I'm missing something.
So you're making the motion that is visible and including the change of the word vendor to manufacturer in addition.
Yep.
Eileen and Anne, is that the correct motion?
Yeah.
So not an attorney, but I think it's fine.
Okay,
I think it's fine too, and you can either read it or we have it. It's your the proposed changes to CCR section 1715 as proposed in the board's current proposal, and with the amendment that Chair Serpa to change vendor to manufacturer.
thank you, Eileen. Do I have a second? I'm sorry, Sam, go ahead.
Just wanted to confirm it has all the additional languages giving chair and executive officer the authority to make non-substantive changes, whatever it takes to get the regulations approved, all that. I don't know if that's needed for me to say it, but I'm sure it's covered. So
Okay.
just want to confirm that.
Thank you for that clarification.
This is Jig. I'll second that.
Thank you, Jig. With a motion and second on the floor, let's open it up for public discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on this agenda item, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, we have John Gray making a request for comment. And again, a reminder to please keep your comment to 3 minutes. I'll give you a 10-second warning. And John, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good morning. This is John Gray. I'm a registered pharmacist with Kaiser Permanente. Thank you for the opportunity to provide our feedback on the committee's draft changes to the regulation. We do continue to believe that the board's proposed changes to its self-assessments that would require the completion of the ADDS self-assessment by hospital pharmacies that operate exempt, non-licensed AUDS devices are inconsistent with the underlying statute, specifically Business and Professions Code sections 4427.2I and 4427.7A. Perhaps the Office of Administrative Law will agree with our previously provided comments on the draft self-assessments, and this issue will be moot. However, with that said, we do appreciate the committee's recognition that only one self-assessment should be required for all of the exempt AUDS devices that are operated by a hospital. This approach will certainly minimize the administrative burden associated with completing the self-assessment for exempt AUDS devices. So we do appreciate the board's recognition of this and the direction that the board has decided to take on this particular question. So thank you very much for the opportunity to provide our feedback on this topic.
Thank you, Dr. Gray.
All right, I see no further requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
With a motion and second and public comment received, I will now take a roll call vote. Jig Patel.
Yes.
Renee Barker.
Yes.
Indira Cameron Banks.
Yes.
Sung Oh.
Yes.
And I vote yes. Motion passes. Thank you. The next agenda item 5 is discussion and consideration of the proposed revisions to the frequently asked questions related to automated drug delivery systems. Members, also related to automated drug delivery systems is our consideration of updating the FAQs. As a part of the 2021 board meeting, the board approved draft FAQs related to ADDSs. To ensure that the board's FAQs remain relevant, updates are necessary when changes in the law occur. Attachment 3 in the meeting materials includes a copy of the proposed updated FAQs. I reviewed the updates and believe they are appropriate and would like to especially thank Supervising Inspector Janice Dang and Ms. Smiley for their work on updating these FAQs. I believe our licensees will benefit greatly from the board's educational efforts that are included in the FAQs. Members, do you have any questions or comments on the draft FAQs? If you believe the proposed revisions are appropriate, I would also entertain a motion for approval.
Those are great FAQs. I would like to make a motion to recommend approval of the proposed revisions to the FAQs related to automated AUDS.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I can second Jake's motion.
Thank you. With a motion and second on the floor, unless there is additional discussion. With a motion and second on the floor, I will now open the discussion for public comment to the proposed changes. Moderator?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on agenda item 5, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and submit it to all panelists, or you may simply raise your hand. We're displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
With a motion and second and public comment received, I will now take a roll call vote. Jake Patel,
Yes.
Renee Barker,
Yes.
Indira Cameron Banks,
Yes.
Sung Oh.
Yes.
Did you say yes? Sung
Yes.
Oh? Okay, sorry, it blinked out. It might have been on my side. And I vote yes, motion passes. Thank you, everyone. We're marching along. Item number 6 is discussion and consideration of the committee's strategic objectives. On an annual basis, the board receives recommendations from the various strategic committees on the recommendations to establish strategic objectives. This annual review also provides the board an opportunity to document the status of the various objectives and to set priorities for the coming year. The meeting materials include the strategic objectives for our committee. Later in this meeting, this committee will also receive presentations on the board's inspection program and citation program. And as a part of how we monitor this is how we monitor the committee's strategic objectives. I believe the established strategic objectives are appropriate and don't believe that there are any changes required. I would also anticipate that the coming year that we will have significant committee activity related to the strategic objective 2.10 as USP completes its work to revise and release chapters related to compounding. Members, I would appreciate your comments on the strategic objectives. And as a part of your comments, please let me know if there are any changes that you would recommend or areas to focus. Members? Okay, I think we're ready for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will open up the Q&A panel, and if any member of the public would like to comment on agenda item 6, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists, or again, you may simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
This area does not require a vote, so we'll move on to our next agenda item. Item number 7, presentation and discussion on the board's inspection program. I would like to welcome Julie Ansell, Chief of Enforcement, to provide the committee with a presentation on the board's inspection program. Ms. Ansell, are you there? The floor is yours.
I am. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So thank you. I am, as Maria said, I am Julie Ansell. I am Chief of Enforcement for the board. Pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with all of you our inspection information and our data for this past fiscal year 21-22. Next slide, please. So why do we inspect? And really, it's consumer protection. That's our board mandate. And sometimes I think that we might focus on discipline as consumer protection. And of course, that is a key component to what we do, but it's not the only component. And to that end, inspections really do provide a significant opportunity for education as part of the process. And the board has actually established a policy goal to inspect all pharmacies every 4 years. So these inspections really provide inspector staff the opportunity to observe, evaluate for compliance, and it also provides an opportunity for education to the licensee population. Next slide, please. So with respect to the inspection process, this is a list of typical items that inspectors will review and observe when they're inside a pharmacy. And the board has also created an online video to watch on the board's website for anybody who is interested in learning more about specifics of the process. I believe that is titled How to Prepare for an Inspection on our website. But in general terms, the inspectors are there to first observe what is happening within the pharmacy. Next slide, please. So the inspectors are also going to ask while they're in the pharmacy for information and confirm compliance with various aspects of pharmacy law. They'll be looking at the self-assessment. Has it been completed? Is the pharmacy transmitting to cures? Is the licensee enrolled in our subscriber alert system? How is their QA policy set up with respect to medication errors, as well as a review of the pharmacy's policies and procedures. Next slide, please. So what is inspected during a visit from the board? Again, assessing the physical state of the pharmacy, as well as looking at the will call area, looking at the shelving, the storage of the drugs. Is it a clean, orderly, free of dust and debris? Looking at the expiration dates of the medication bottles. Are there any expired medications that are out there? And again, clean, cluttered, is the pharmacy, basically in good shape, orderly, organized for the practice of pharmacy. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, inspections are really a great opportunity for education for our licensee population. And so as part of our routine inspections that we do guide our inspectors to ensure that certain topics are covered. And a portion of that inspection is an educational opportunity for the licensee. And so kind of in no particular order, I'll run down a couple things that an inspector, might discuss with the licensee. They'll remind them of specific things, possibly reminding them of the 2-hour CE required for law and ethics. That's something that we often mention these days. Reminding them of the script, the resources on the board's website. We also have an inspection pamphlet that we may hand out. It is also on the board's website, so if we don't have it physically there, we can refer the licensee to that document as well. Recently, clearly in the first year, COVID-related issues, always pointing them to our website, CDC guidance, as well as CDPH guidance. We might remind of the written notice of the right to consultation if they're doing mail order or a delivery service. Always, as I discussed before, the importance of the self-assessment and the fact that it is just such a great tool in your roadmap for compliance. The importance of, going through it thoroughly, not just initialing, but just, really reading it for a compliance for your pharmacy. We'll also talk about staffing at the community pharmacies, as well as keeping a log and ensuring that they have signed the policies and procedures. Can you give me just 1 second? My mouse has done something strange and I'm not able to forward my slides. Just give me 1 second, okay? Sorry about that, guys. Just a second.
That's not a problem. It seems we're having a glitchy day today.
I'm going to close my my video for a second. Is that okay?
Nope, whatever you have to do. No problem,
Is
Julie.
that okay, Maria? Do you mind?
No problem, Julie. Whatever you have to do.
Thank you.
We'll just take a moment here. We're having a little bit of a glitchy day today.
Sorry about that, guys. I am super sorry.
No problem.
Yeah,
Things happen.
my mouse wasn't letting me do what I needed to do. So I think I was talking about staffing requirements at community pharmacies, that CCR 1714.3, just kind of guiding pharmacists through that, reminding them about transmitting to cures. And
I'm
then
sorry, Julie, we can't see you anymore. We just see your background.
Oh, okay.
But that
I think I'm just going to turn it off. Is that okay?
I don't think that's a problem. Eileen and Anne, is it okay to continue without video? I think it's okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
let me
that's
know,
okay.
and I can reset it if I need to. I'm super sorry. Apologize for that. Hey, where was I? I was talking about community staffing, reminding licensees about that. And then a couple of law changes for this year in 2022, pharmacists initiating vaccines under 1746.4D, talking about the new requirement that came out in April with respect to a licensee providing the board with their email address. The new requirement in April again of the respect to drug loss reporting under 1714.6, as well as a most recent regulation that came out 1717.5, which are new automatic refill requirements. So again, these inspections really just allow for dialogue and education between the licensee and the inspector. And of course, the ability of the licensee to ask questions of the inspector. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's go ahead and dive into some of our numbers here. This is our total inspections completed. So this gives you a view of what has been accomplished the last 5 years. And as you see in this slide, the board, if you look at 21-22, the board performed 2,938 inspections during this past fiscal year. And this includes all types of inspections, routine inspections, compounding, complaint inspections, complaint investigation inspections, probation visits, outsourcing, and automated drug delivery system inspections. Next slide, please. So we wanted to kind of do a drill down of what that total inspection number of that over 2,900 inspections is made up of. And as you can see from this slide, the vast majority of the inspections that the inspectors completed in pharmacies were routine in pharmacies. And again, those pharmacies are our largest site licensing program. And routine inspections are accounting for about a third to about 38% of our total inspections last fiscal year. And then, of course, sterile compounding, those mandated inspections, that makes up another third of our total inspections. We also had complaint inspections as well as probation inspections, probation visits on those that are individuals on probation as well as pharmacies that are on probation. And you can see also in this slide, there's an in-person inspection number and a desk audit number. And what that is over the last couple of years throughout COVID, as conditions warranted, we did suspend inspections. I think for last fiscal year, 2021, we suspended for a couple of months, as well as this year, we also suspended our inspections for a couple of months. And in those cases where we still needed to, of course, perform our mandated sterile compounding inspections, we did request a site-specific waiver. And that was sought to allow for the issuance or renewal of the license without a physical inspection. And in those situations, we used a desk audit process that we came up with during when COVID first began. Next slide, please. So this is just a continuation of the remainder of the inspection types that total up that 2,938 inspections that we conducted this year. You can see our outsourcing inspections. It looks like a small number, but it's actually a pretty mighty program that we have. Those are 30 outsourcing inspections. The bulk of our outsourcing inspections are out-of-state inspections, which do require the inspector to travel and fly out of the state. So typically they'll fly on a Monday, inspect on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then fly back on a Friday. So they're pretty labor-intense inspections. We do send 2 inspectors, and we are regulating to current food manufacturing practices, CGMPs. There's a lot of data to review prior to the inspection, during the inspection. Some of these are pretty large manufacturing locations. So I'm just trying to kind of explain that smaller number of inspections, but it really equates to really 30 weeks of inspection. So it's a heavy workload for the board. And then finally, we had other routine other inspection types, basically by license, our automated drug delivery systems making up the bulk of that, 185 of those 230 other types of inspections. And again, we were able to perform over 2,900 this year. So just proud of our inspector staff. Next slide, please. So in total, the board has close to 6,400 licensed pharmacies. And last year, the board conducted close to 1,600 routines in those almost 6,400 pharmacies, which equates to about 25% of the licensee population. So then as we break down that number of routine inspections, that 1,099, those are true routine inspections where we are just at a site for no other reason than a routine inspection, reviewing for and observing for compliance. We're not there for any other reason. And then as it gets broken down, you see probation visits, complaint investigations, and sterile compounding. And those are another 499 routines that were conducted at various pharmacies while we were there for another visit type. Again, probation, complaint investigation, or a compounding visit. And then we also performed the routine. And again, just a reminder that, we did suspend inspections for a couple months. So just personally proud of the efforts that were made by staff to accomplish this many routines, not even in a full fiscal year. Next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of the outcomes of the routine inspections. And when we look at that true routines, that first routine, meaning again that inspectors were just there solely to perform an inspection, about half of those received no violation as the outcome of the inspection, and then the other half received a correction or a violation notice at the end of the inspection. And then the second grouping is routine inspections on a complaint visit where we get a complaint possibly from a consumer, another entity, a public entity, another agency, what have you. Those are routines on complaint investigations. And those outcomes are fairly evenly distributed across no violation, a correction, and a written notice. Kind of 30 to 40% of each of those, and violation notices being less of the number there. And then finally on routine inspections, where we are there for a probation visit. These are locations that have had, fairly heavy interaction with the board because they're on probation. These are locations that may have a consultant working with them. They certainly have a probation inspector that has been assigned to them by the board. So in this situation, you can see there are just one violation notice with this grouping, and that makes sense that there would be less. about 90% no violations in those routines, and then a handful of corrections for those facilities. Next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of the top corrections on routine pharmacy inspections, and these are in no particular order. But, is the pharmacy clean and orderly? Clearly some of the things that we're observing when we're at the pharmacy, right? When we talked about what is being looked at, what is being observed, a safe and secure pharmacy, possible some labeling issues, the notice of the right to consultation, is the license displayed in a clearly viewable state, possible self-assessment hasn't been filled out or it's incomplete. And then just very few, but some compounding violations. Typically, those are non-sterile in these pharmacies, but very, very few of those. Next slide, please. And then top violations on routine pharmacy inspections. Kind of some of these are repeats from the corrections, clean and orderly pharmacy. In some instances, we come across possibly erroneous or uncertain prescriptions as we're going through some of the documentation of prescriptions that we come across. Again, the self-assessment, unauthorized disclosure, that could be possibly just when saying that protected health information has been disclosed, or sometimes when we are at some of these pharmacies, when you're at the counter, you can actually see the will call area and some of that protected health information on the bags of the prescriptions can be seen. And then again, at the bottom there, unprofessional conduct, not very many of those, but just to be noted there. Next slide, please. And we talk about consultation a lot and how it's just such an important part of the smart services that we provide that pharmacy provides to patients. And so over the last few years, we've drilled down on some information specific to routine inspections and consultation. And we want to give you a review of the findings and some of these routine inspections. So in 66 of routine inspections that we did this last year, we revealed some kind of issue with patient consultation. In 9 of those, the inspector actually witnessed that consultation wasn't being provided, or that possibly the clerk of the check were screening for consultation. And then another 57 of those 66 inspections we talked about in those corrections, where the pharmacy is doing mail order or delivery, and then it's discovered that they're not providing that written notice of the right to consultation to the patient, again, when they're doing mail order or delivery. Next slide, please. So as we talked about when we started the presentation, the board does have a policy goal to inspect all pharmacies at least once every 4 years. So this is kind of a drill down of what has transpired over the last few years in terms of how many pharmacies we've been able to inspect. And I think, this slide really just shows the progress that the board has been able to make in meeting that goal. And there's just been, I believe, significant progress in all areas. I believe that the most significant data point is, if you're looking at this slide to the far right, at the bottom, that number 463, it just shows a real significant reduction in the number of pharmacies that have not been inspected. So that's as of last year, our current pharmacy population, 463 out of 611 pharmacies, or 8% of that current population, had not been inspected or visited for one reason or another since January of 2013. And you can see, if you go one block over, that 1,193 from last year, that's the number of pharmacies that we weren't able to get to as of last year. So that was 20% of the current licensing population, versus now we're down to 8% of the current licensing population that we weren't able to inspect this past, or haven't inspected since January 2013. And just to point out that number, the 6,011, I had mentioned before, we have close to 6,000, we have close to 6,400 pharmacies. That 6,011 number is all pharmacies, but we took out pharmacies that have been, that were recently issued a license in this past year, to give like a truer representation of the current licensing population, because we did license, I think it's 381 pharmacies this year. So we pulled out that number to show you that data point. And so next year, a lot of our focus will be on those 463 that were not inspected. We will focus on licensees in terms of our routine inspection program that have not been inspected within that 4-year mark. And just really hopeful within the next few years that we are going to be able to reach that goal of inspecting all the locations within every 4 years. I believe we're really close to it. And again, just want to state that I'm proud of the inspection team and the efforts that have been made by staff. Next slide, please. This is just kind of a summary of what we just talked about. We talked about that 463, which is 8% of the population. So, if you flip that on its head, the board has inspected, over 90% of all currently licensed pharmacies for one reason or another since January 2013. And that January 2013 cutoff mark, that's just where our data ends. That's where our information just, that's as far back as our system goes. And again, this is all inspection types. So it's not just routines, but I think it's a real testament of our getting out there and completing these inspections. Again, over 90% of all currently licensed pharmacy locations have been visited by the board since January of 2013. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I really appreciate the opportunity today to share these accomplishments with you. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm going to see if I can turn my camera back on.
Thank you, Ms. Ansel. I really appreciate your presentation and the staff's efforts towards meeting our strategic objective to routine inspections. That was the last topic that you talked about there. I'm greatly pleased to see that the data shows that pharmacies with no inspections since 2013 has dropped significantly from 2,080 2 years ago to less than 500 this year. It appears that the issue of those pharmacies with no inspection will be completely resolved during this fiscal year. And that's something we've talked a lot about over the last few years. I'd like to remind the board members that this goal was established. Since this goal was established, Julie and the board did not get any additional resources. Rather, they completed a lot of additional inspections with their current resources. So we're marching towards our goal of an inspection once every 4 years. It's tremendous success. And I'm grateful for Julie, your efforts and the efforts of your staff.
Thank you.
There is one area that I am concerned about, and I'd like to hear a little bit more from the members. And that has to do with our continued efforts or continued issues about pharmacist consultation not being provided to patients. This is an area that we've also talked about in the past, and it's a little disheartening to see that it still continues to be an issue. Members, do you have any questions or comments for Julie or anything that was presented?
I just want to say this is Song, Julie and Anne and all the staff. Thank you for doing an amazing job and trying to meet the goal. Really appreciate it. Consultations, that's just lots to say, but I will say not much today. I just think that that's something we will have to keep continuing to communicate and try to do what we can. But, just a very challenging issue with the dynamics that's going on out there in a workplace. So.
I would like to second on something that President O said. Consultation is key to medication error reduction and safety of consumers. With the new electronic prescription and a lot of changes in how prescriptions are written and refills authorized, where prescriptions are not being reassigned, so to speak, in the past before e-scripts, and patients and pharmacy staff looking at some of these new prescriptions as a refill. I think that's where the issue lies, and a communication of such and our communication committee does a great job with updating the script and putting relevant data into it. But Sung's absolutely right about, I think we need to over communicate using our email notification system and using some of the statistics that were shared today, because it is important. Consultations are key to medication error reduction, and there can be no shortcuts to that.
Any other comments? I think we're ready for public comment then, moderator.
All right, I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on agenda item 7, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, or simply raise your hand. We'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please do.
Okay.
Thanks again, Julie. Wonderful presentation.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Move on to agenda item 8, presentation and discussion of the board's citation and fine program. We will now receive our annual presentation on the board's citation and fine program. Our dear Ann Sodergren will be doing this presentation for us. Ann, I don't see you, but I know you're there. The floor is yours.
I am. Thank you, Maria. I'm here. So as I start the presentation today, what I want to just kind of remind members is that when the board conducts an investigation, there's a spectrum of different types of outcomes that can occur, one of which is the citation. So today we're going to talk about the citation program specifically, but this does not represent a full outcome. It's just one type of potential outcome. And you'll notice that there's a bit of a crossover between the presentation that Julie just provided and what I'm going to be talking about. So when we looked at the inspection outcomes, you notice that a lot of times there may be violations issued. So when violations are identified, a notice of violation is issued during an inspection, that's typically going to result in some sort of investigation with different kinds of outcomes. And one of those outcomes may be the issuance of a citation with or without a fine. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So in the meeting materials are a lot of the relevant provisions of pharmacy law that really govern how the board must operate its citation and fine program. So I'm not going to review those in their entirety, but they are detailed out in the meeting materials themselves. If we go to the next slide, please. So the board uses its authority to issue citations and fines as a way to address significant violations, but not those that warrant removal or restriction of a license to ensure consumer protection. So on the spectrum of possible outcomes, citations are serious, but they are not typically as serious as those that are going to warrant full referral to the Attorney General's office to, again, remove or restrict a license. In general, our fine authority is about $5,000 per investigation. However, there are some different provisions of the law that establish different fine authorities, but typically $5,000 is our maximum. So as an example, the board does have authority to issue fines of up to $25,000 for internet prescriptions, and that's per prescription. If a pharmacy is purchasing from an unlicensed source, that can be, the fine can be assessed of $5,000 per invoice. And then more recently, the beginning of this year, the board secured additional fine authority for community chain pharmacies. There's two specific provisions, but in general terms, under those business and professions codes, the board can assess a fine of up to $100,000 for violations found in 3 or more community pharmacies that are similar, and then up to $150,000 for violations that result from a written policy of the community chain pharmacy that resulted in the violations of pharmacy law. So if we can go to that next slide, please. So California Code of Regulations 1775.2, this really establishes the policy direction detailing the factors to be considered when assessing a fine. So when we look at the board citation and fine program, you all have established your policy through the regulations, but you do not issue the citations and fines. That is rather done at the staff level. So you have conveyed to staff what are the appropriate things to consider when determining how to assess a fine. If we go to that next slide, please. So let's quickly talk about kind of what that end-to-end process is. So typically there is going to be some sort of triggering event that is going to result in us opening up an investigation. So this could be a routine inspection where we have identified violations of pharmacy law, could be a consumer complaint, could be a referral from another agency. But whatever that triggering event, then we are opening up an investigation. That case is then going to be assigned to an inspector. As a quick reminder, our inspectors, our field inspectors, are all licensed pharmacists. So we are so fortunate because we actually have pharmacists that are actually performing these investigations for us. Upon completion of the investigation and the writing of the report, that then goes to a supervising inspector for review. That supervising inspector, again, is also a licensed pharmacist. They're going to complete a review of the investigation and the evidence to confirm that we have, 1, conducted the investigation appropriately, and then 2, that the findings that are detailed are consistent with the evidence that's provided. Following that, for cases where we have substantiated violations, those cases are then going to go to a second level of review. And that's typically performed by the chief of enforcement and or the other executive staff, executive officer, assistant executive officer. So then there's a second level of review that occurs. For cases where the board is going to be, or where the recommendation is to issue a citation and fine, we do employ a case norming system where we meet as a collective group to discuss the case and determine the appropriate outcome. And this is really intended to try to achieve some normalizing within the organization, but we also have to recognize that all investigations are different, right? There's absolutely a spectrum when we're looking at issues of noncompliance. So as part of that norming session, we're looking to see, maybe historically how we would have approached something, but then also what are the specific facts in this matter, as well as what is the licensee's history, because that's all going to determine, what that fine or what that outcome will be. So when we look at those various outcomes, then we could issue a citation with or without a fine, and we could also include an order of abatement. We're not required to, but we do use the order of abatement tool as one way to, again, confirm and or ensure compliance with pharmacy law. So if we have issued, once we issue the citations, then an individual is provided with an opportunity to appeal it, or they can comply with the citation as issued, including submitting an order of abatement if required and or if they choose to do so. As I said, there is an appeal process for individuals, so they can appeal informally to an office conference that is convened by board staff, or they can request a formal appeal through the Attorney General's office. And in those cases, then assigned Deputy Attorney General represents the board. So if we could go to that next slide, please. So this just provides some historical context, specific to citations that have been issued, so it's a 5-year. You'll notice that the high in terms of this 5-year time period was probably fiscal year 17-18. There was a slow decline, and now we're kind of trending back up. So it'll be interesting to continue to watch this trending to see where things land. So with fines collected, you'll notice that we're also seeing an increase in the fines both assessed and collected. So we will continue to monitor this, and if the committee decides that they'd like to take a deeper dive into some of these data points moving forward, we're happy to do so. Next slide, please. So this really talks about the overall investigation time. So this is from the time that the investigation is opened until that final outcome, which is the issuance of the citation. So this time includes the issuance of the citation. If there is subsequent appeals, there will be additional time. But if you look, we are trending down, and in 21-22, the average processing time from the time we initiated a complaint to the issuance of a citation and fine is less than a year. And that's pretty significant given the robustness of our investigations, as well as the levels of review that are performed, all because we want to make sure that we are fulfilling our consumer protection mandate appropriately. We could go to that next slide, please. So when we talk about orders of abatements, there are certain kinds of violations that kind of lend themselves to it. So when we look at the order of abatement provisions, they've been on the books for a really long time. But in 2018, the board really gave more direction to board staff, and really felt that the order of abatement tool was maybe not being fully realized. So since that time, the board has been using that tool a little bit more routinely and issuing order of abatements. Sometimes that order of abatement is mandated. Other times, we are using it as a tool to allow licensees to either comply with an order of abatement, or they can just go ahead and pay the fine. So depending on the type of case and the violations involved, as well as the licensee's outcome, that many times will drive some of our decision points on there. So if we could go to that next slide, please. So when we talk about the different kinds of abatements that can be ordered, it really does range based on the types of underlying violations in the investigation. So we're trying very hard to determine what would be meaningful education and or actions that would be taken by the licensee to perhaps prevent such a violation from occurring again in the future. So when we look at that, there are different kinds of violations where we feel like, this individual hopefully would benefit from the board's prescription drug abuse prevention training course. So sometimes we may require that. If we believe that there's ethical issues involved, then we may require them to complete the regulated ethics course. Sometimes if it's immunization related, or maybe you're going to have someone go back and complete some additional training. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at when we are doing it. And these, like I said, highlight just some of those different abatement types that we consider when we're determining the appropriate outcome. So sometimes those abatements, if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So sometimes the order of abatements maybe need to be a little more at a systemic level, right? So it might be that we are asking the pharmacy as an order of abatement to complete additional staff training in a specific area. Maybe it's an in-service for all staff. Sometimes we're saying, hey, you got to redo your self-assessment and then take appropriate corrective actions. Or sometimes it's updating policies and procedures to ensure that they are actually consistent with the law, and then ensure that staff are appropriately trained on those. If we could go to that next slide, please. So this just highlights and kind of demonstrates the use of the order of abatement. So you'll notice in 1920, we had a very robust order of abatement process. It is trending down a little bit, but I would anticipate as we continue to move forward with citations, that number could increase. I would say that as when we look at citations, and this may be an area that we probably want to take a deeper dive in the future, is when we look at the construct of them, there are certain types of both licensee populations that probably don't lend themselves as well. And when we look at the top types of violations for certain types of licensing classes, it may not necessarily be appropriate for an order of abatement, or that tool may not be an appropriate one when we're looking on how to resolve an investigation. So if we can go to that next slide. So what you'll see in 21-22, the board issued 269 orders of abatement as part of the citation process, and that 168 orders of abatement were satisfied. Now, I mentioned earlier that an order of abatement may not be mandatory, and so because of that, the numbers may not always line up. The other thing is sometimes an order of abatement takes a while to comply with. So as an example, the ethics course is about an 18-month process. So you're not going to have that satisfied immediately, right? There's a process to do that. Or the same thing with prescription drug abuse prevention training. We only offer that training, a few times a year. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this slide kind of details out some of the types of violations that really do maybe lend themselves to an order of abatement. So we look at, when we look at 1714C, and whether or not the whether or not the pharmacy is clean and orderly. So sometimes, and again, I want to super emphasize that there is a spectrum of the violations that we find, right? So perhaps if it was, maybe a dusty shelf, dusty sink, whatever, right? We may issue an order of abatement that they provide us with photos that show that the issue has been remedied, right? Please, though, what I want to really emphasize is sometimes we hear from the regulated public that, well, this person was issued a citation in this area and this was their outcome. I was issued the same violation and this was my outcome. That's because there's a spectrum on that violation. And so it's really important to kind of recognize that when we look at this data, right, it absolutely is a violation of the same code section, but the seriousness, the egregiousness of that violation may vary. And because of that, then sometimes different outcomes are appropriate. So sorry for that, but wanted to just kind of highlight that. So if we could go on to that next slide, please. So when we're talking about the appeal process, I mentioned previously that an individual issued a citation or a business does have the opportunity to appeal it. There's two different avenues. They can explore both. One is a office conference. And typically when we're convening that office conference, we're really providing the licensee to provide additional information that maybe we didn't have at the time that we conducted the investigation. Those are typically presided over by the Chief of Enforcement and the Supervising Inspector, and then they will issue a decision on those. And it's really, sometimes we view it as, it might also be a continuation of the investigation process because that individual, that licensee is presenting additional information, like I said, that maybe we didn't have at the time. In addition, a licensee can request that formal appeal process, and like I said, those are managed through the Office of the Attorney General, who represents the board in the matter. So those appeals can be handled, they are handled consistent with the Administrative Procedures Act. If they go before an administrative law judge, they will issue a proposed decision that you then as members review and determine whether or not the proposed decision is appropriate. There are times when a citation appeal is also a stipulated settlement is negotiated. What's very interesting is looking at some preliminary data for this last year. It's fascinating to me. The number of appeals that are subsequently withdrawn from the AG's office is quite significant. So that is going to be a data point that we're going to continue to monitor for a while. I believe that, there was maybe 34 that were sent over and then subsequently withdrawn from the AG's office. So we're going to watch and see if there's a trend happening there. The next slide. So we've been talking a lot about citations that were issued. So to comply or to close a citation, right, we need to close out that matter. So I talked a little about appeal processes. So we may be issued, but it's not closed, right, because that appeal is ongoing. They're considered closed when either they comply with the citation or the matter is resolved through the appeal process. So this slide is really showing those that were closed during the last fiscal year. And when I talked about, the appeals that are being referred over to the AG's office and then subsequently withdrawn, that's really getting to that data point that we have at the bottom of the slide. So we are going to be taking a deeper dive into that data over the next year to see about some of the trends that are happening there. If we could go to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about appeal outcomes. We've talked about the two different ways for a licensee to appeal a citation. So the vast majority of them are going to an office conference where they are, like I said, they are, an informal office conference. So you can see that there's a range of outcomes, and really this really is an opportunity for the licensee to provide us with additional information. And as you can see, many times that the engagement in the office conference and the additional or supplemental information that's provided can yield, a change in the citation outcome. So you'll notice that of the 229 that were convened in fiscal year 21-22, 27 of those were actually dismissed. A significant number were modified, and about 85 were upheld. When we look at the outcomes for appeals that are sent to the AG's office, what we find is they're going to take a lot longer to resolve, right? Because there's going to be an administrative hearing typically. So when we look, although we referred 34 in 21-22, there's still 24 of them that are pending, and that's just because the process takes a lot longer. If we could go to that next slide, please. So I feel a little bit like a broken record player, but I want to talk again. So this is the top 10 violations, or top 10 violations where then a pharmacy was issued a citation. And again, there's a spectrum. I know I keep saying it, but there's a spectrum of violations. So when we look at the top violations, you'll see that medication errors still is the #1 violation that results in the issuance of a citation for a pharmacy. So it was the top last year as well. What's new is that the PIC violations, of which there were 66 citations issued for those violations, is significantly higher than the prior year. The prior year, there were about 27. So there is some shifting in those top violations that resulted in a citation issued to pharmacies. Many of them are remaining the same, but like I said, some of them are increasing with frequency. So this is another thing that, one, we're going to keep an eye on, but also this slide particularly provides really good information and education to licensees. So typically following these annual presentations, the board's then going to take this information and include it in the script, because if nothing else, it helps to highlight to licensees and maybe put something on the radar that maybe would not otherwise have been. So if we can go to that next slide, please. We're then looking at the same type of data, but this is for pharmacists that were issued citations. Again, medication errors was at the top. We're looking at, safety and security of a pharmacy, the ability to maintain a pharmacy. So that seems like a lot, but that can encompass a lot. So we're looking at that spectrum. Misuse of education. This is now on the top of, falls within that top 10 violations. So those are violations of 4306.5, which is the misuse of education. And so that was not on the list last year of top violations. And then we've got compounding violations, unauthorized disclosures, those kinds of things that are similar from prior years. Next slide, please. So these are the top 10 violations for interns. Because the number is so small, it's really hard to kind of draw any kind of meaning, but there's the data for you of those that we issued. If we can go to the next slide. So this is the top 10 violations that resulted in the issuance of a citation to a technician. So there has been an increase in the number of citations issued to techs this year. And then the top issue as for self-use violations, which is moving to the top. Last year it was the second or the third. So it is possible for an individual to be issued a citation with more than one violation noted. So sometimes if it's a conviction, that's related to substance use, the individual may receive violations in both areas. Depends on what the investigation concludes. Next slide, please. So as Julie highlighted, we also have taken a look at the duty to consult violations specifically and where those landed. So you'll notice that in fiscal year 21-22, there were 49 citations, and then we have the different outcomes there for you. You will note that the fines assessed to pharmacies are typically higher than those assigned to pharmacists. Next slide. So I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation today that the board does have new citation and fine authority to issue fines under 4317.5. Those are where we can issue a fine of up to $100,000 for repeat violations by community pharmacies or community chain pharmacies under common ownership. And we also have the authority to issue a fine of up to $150,000 for those policies and procedures that result in the violation. So I'm going to let the committee know that we have issued 2 citations because those matters are not closed yet. I would prefer that we avoid speaking in any great detail about those 2. This was more just to let board members know as part of your oversight of the program that we have issued 2, and I would anticipate that next year we will have additional data and we'll be able to have more robust discussion because we believe that at that point there may be some closed citations that will lend themselves to a little bit better discussion. So with that, I will just ask if you have any questions, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Anne. A wonderful presentation. I'd like to note that, consistent with the board's strategic plan, that I assume that these common violations will be used in education materials. You stated that at the end during your discussion, but I just wanted to highlight that the purpose of this is for us, our oversight, but also to educate the regulated public. Members, do you have any questions for Anne?
Always, thank you, Anne. I appreciate it all. Great presentation from you.
I'm pausing just a moment because I know she presented a lot of information there. I just wanted to assure that members don't have any comments or questions. Okay, let's go to public comment. Moderator?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment on Agenda Item 8, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or you may simply raise your hand. If you've called into the meeting, just press *3, and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please do, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks again, Anne, great presentation. Obviously, you covered all the topics. No one had any questions. Thank you. Our next item is Agenda Item 9, discussion and consideration of community pharmacy staff requirements, including Business and Professions Code, Section 4113.5 and Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 1714.3. Members, the meeting materials detail the relevant sections of pharmacy law. Business and Professions Code 4113.5 provides that a pharmacist shall not be required to engage in the practice of pharmacy unless another employee of the pharmacy or an employee of the establishment is made available to assist the pharmacist at all times. The board's regulation details the requirements pharmacies must meet to satisfy the statute. There are investigations pending in this area. So I request that members, staff, and the public keep their comments general in nature to assure we do not inadvertently expose information that would preclude members' involvement in the future decision-making process for this enforcement matter. So just to be clear, keep your comments, both members and public, general in nature, not specific information, because there are ongoing investigations that could be jeopardized if those items were brought to us too early. that would mean that all these people on the board here would not be able to participate in the discussion when it comes for us later. The materials detailed in the implementation strategy used by staff, where staff initially focused their efforts on education. They educated members of the public on the requirements of the statutes. Staff have transitioned into issuing orders of correction to gain compliance. However, after a significant period of time to allow pharmacies to comply with the provisions, depending on the egregiousness of the violations, staff determined the appropriate outcomes. To date, the board has issued 2 citations for violations of these provisions. And again, I repeat that these are currently undergoing investigation pending. One area to note is there appears to be a misunderstanding by some members of our regulated public about the requirements of the statute, which causes frustration amongst pharmacists who are not requesting assistance because assistance would not be made available even when a request is made. So let me repeat that just to be clear, because this is an area of confusion. So I want to make sure I state it correctly. So I'm going to read it again. There seems to be misunderstandings by some about the requirements of the statute, as well as frustration by some pharmacists who are not requesting assistance because such assistance would not be made available even if they were to ask for it. I appreciate the review of staff's implementation efforts. Members, as I open up for discussion, please refrain from asking specific questions that could compromise our role later in the enforcement process. Members, do you have any comments or questions? Quiet group today. Okay, I'm sure we'll have some public comment, which I'm really looking forward to the public comment. Moderator, please open the lines for public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've opened up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and submit it to all panelists. Or you may simply raise your hand. If you've called into the meeting, you can press *3 to raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment.
As members of the public are signing on, I'd like to request that Anne, Eileen, and myself be diligent. So if the comments go to be too specific, that we interrupt the speaker to instruct them. Thank you.
All right, and we have attendee identified as Ed Howard who'd like to make comments. So Ed, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go.
Ed Howard, pleased to be here on behalf of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. And I think in particular, we wanted to express first our appreciation for agendizing this item and for the board, both in its materials and in our conversations about implementing the statute. Understanding at a pretty foundational level the importance of public education, as particularly regarding this bill. And I think I'd like to offer 3 quick observations, if I may. The first is to underscore what is in your materials, that in fact there is a pretty good amount of confusion out there among your licensees about the requirements of this bill. That is exacerbated by the fact that this bill is most pressing when applied to large chains, where there is a pretty powerful or pretty significant asymmetry of power between your licensees and between the overall pharmacy employers. So it means that there is unusual pressure there on both not to complain or fear not to complain, as well as opportunities to obscure what the law actually requires when and if assistance is requested. The second, it relates to the first, of course, which is the ongoing need on behalf of the board to continue its public education efforts. As the board is far more aware than, in fact, we are, enforcement in almost every DCA setting, including this one, is largely complaint-driven. And so, as the initial presentation and the materials point out, there is a bit of a catch-22 that to the extent that that your licensees don't understand the law nor perceive the usefulness in complaining, in part because they might not understand the law, that chills enforcement. And so we would encourage the board to think about implementation of this important law and the board's excellent regulations here as an ongoing commitment rather than a sequence commitment, perhaps including ongoing seminars like this one, perhaps including even a designated website to take complaints about this, where there are click-through opportunities to guide people, complainants, about what the law means and what it doesn't mean. I think the third thing, and then I'll thank you for your time and close, is the recognition of the board that this is at its core a true health and safety problem.
10 seconds.
That to the extent that the board, that these pharmacies are not staffing appropriately, it means your licensees are unable to do the jobs for which we have charged them. And so using and very loudly publicly using the board's new higher fine and enforcement authority, as it appears you are already doing from the prior presentation, but letting...
I'm sorry, the 3 minutes are up. Would you like me to let him continue? There aren't any other requests for public comment.
I think, to be fair, we have reached the 3 minutes, which is longer than our norm, but I appreciate his comments. And Tricia, did you say there's no other comment?
Correct. So shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please do.
Okay.
I did want to make one comment, and maybe Anne could speak up also, is there was recently an email alert that was sent out to licensees regarding this subject, I believe. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. We didn't talk about this before. Can you maybe remark a little bit on that educational effort?
Yeah, so we did recently issue a subscriber alert. It was more specific actually to the provisions of Senate Bill 362 that spoke to workload quotas. But I think the dynamic, that I don't want to speak for the last individual that provided public comment, but I think the dynamic is probably the same, where we've heard public comment about, from pharmacists indicating that they are fearful to provide, or to notify the board of violations because of retaliation. So I'm just reporting what has been presented to the board, not weighing in on that. So I think that people could look at that subscriber alert and some of the information in there, including some potential whistleblower protections that may be, helpful for them to review, that are included, as well as we did provide a little bit of direction about how to file that online complaint through our website. And so I think it could be used for the dynamic, I believe, is the same. It was directed for Senate Bill 362, but I think the information applies well for this presentation and the violation codes referenced in the meeting materials. I hope that was.
Thank you for the clarification, and I appreciate that information. We'll move on to our next agenda item 10, review and discussion of enforcement statistics. Attachment 6 in the meeting materials includes the year-end and 3-year statistics. There's a lot of data provided on those, on our statistics, several pages of details. Members, do you have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I think we're ready for public comment.
All right. I'm opening up the Q&A panel. If any member of the public would like to comment, please type comment using the field in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or you may simply raise your hand. We are displaying instructions and we'll give you a moment. All right, I see no requests for public comment at this time. Shall I close the Q&A panel?
Please do.
Okay.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is 11, future committee meeting dates. Members, you will note that there are several meetings planned throughout this year. This was in part to ensure sufficient time to consider updated or revised USP compounding chapters. Unfortunately, we do not have the timing on when the revised chapters will be released. Depending upon the release, we may need to adjust our meeting schedule. As a part of its May 14th, 2022, and that's the USP, announced that they did not have an anticipated date for the final publication of the revised USP chapters. The board will continue to monitor for updates and will keep members apprised of potential impacts to our meeting schedule. Appreciate your understanding. Lastly, thank you very much for your time today, everyone. It's good to see everyone. Thank you for your participation, and thank you, members of the public. I look forward to seeing you at our next board meeting. Thank you, Anne, staff, board members, and Tricia, thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you,
you.
too.
See you all next week.